The silence in the house had weight. It pressed against the walls, settled into the cushions of the old couch, draped itself over the bookshelves like dust that no amount of cleaning could ever lift. Sometimes Elena swore she could still hear Julian's footsteps moving down the hallway slow, familiar, the soft scuff of socks on hardwood, or the low hum of a song they used to sing together when the evening stretched long and lazy. 2 years had passed since he left. The world outside had kept turning, seasons changing, people laughing in cafes, but inside these walls time had simply stopped. Elena had always been the resilient one. People said it like a compliment. After Julian's death, though, that resilience felt thinner than paper, fragile enough to tear if she breathed too hard. She kept waiting for the ache to soften. It never did. His absence lived in her chest, a quiet, stubborn guest that followed her from the kitchen to the bedroom and back again. Therapy gave her tools. Breathing exercises. Journaling prompts. Gentle reminders that grief wasn't linear. They helped in the way a bandage helps a cut that refuses to close. The wounds stayed. Then one gray afternoon, staring out the rain-streaked window, the thought arrived uninvited. A dog. Maybe a dog could change the texture of the silence. She had never been an animal person, not the way Julian had been, always stopping to greet every stray, laughing when they leaned into his hand like they'd known him forever. But the loneliness had grown teeth. It hurt to walk through rooms that still carried the shape of his presence. So she called the local shelter. The next days blurred together. Fluorescent lights, eager barks, hopeful eyes behind chain link. She met dozens of dogs. None of them felt right. Then she saw Luca. He wasn't flashy. No glossy coat, no perfect proportions. Just a scruffy mix with fur the color of wet pavement and eyes that seemed to hold too much knowing for a creature so small and ordinary. He didn't bark or paw at the gate. He simply watched her. Head tilted, quiet. When she crouched down, he stepped forward and pressed his nose gently against the wire, a single, deliberate gesture. Something inside Elena shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough to make her throat tighten. She signed the papers that afternoon. Luca came home with her. His paws skittered across the floor as he explored, sniffing corners, chair legs, the rug that still smelled faintly of Julian's cologne. Elena stood in the doorway and watched, heart caught somewhere between excitement and fear. She'd opened her home to a stranger. A living thing that could scratch, shed, break things. Yet already his presence softened the edges of the quiet. That first night she led him onto the bed. She expected awkwardness, the strange bulk of another body sharing her space after so long alone. Instead, Luca curled against her side, head resting on her hip, warm and solid. His breathing slowed into a steady rhythm, rise, fall, rise, fall. For the first time in months, Elena felt something close to warmth bloom beneath her ribs. She lay there listening to the soft snuffle of his snores, and just for a moment, the hole Julian left didn't feel quite so vast. Weeks slipped by. Luca became more than company. He became her shadow. When she woke crying at 3 a.m, he was there nudging her hand until she buried her fingers in his fur. When she sat too long staring at nothing, he rested his chin on her knee and waited. She started talking to him the way she used to talk to Julian. Small things at first. The coffee's too bitter today. I found that old playlist we made. Then deeper things, confessions, regrets, hope she hadn't admitted even to herself. Luca never answered, of course. But he listened with those steady brown eyes. And somehow that was enough. One evening she poured a glass of red wine and sank onto the couch. Luca immediately settled at her feet, head tilted up, watching. She reached down and scratched behind his ears. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she murmured. His tail thumped once against the floorboard, slow, deliberate. A real smile curved her lips, small, tentative, but real. For the first time in a very long time, Elena felt seen. Nights grew easier. Luca's warmth beside her became a kind of anchor. Lying in the dark, her thoughts would drift from Julian to the steady breathing at her side. Sometimes she whispered Julian's name into the quiet, half expecting an answer. And sometimes, only sometimes, she felt the warmth beside her shift, as if in reply. A fleeting pressure. A subtle settling. She told herself it was imagination. Wishful thinking. Yet the longer Luca stayed, the harder it became to dismiss the quiet certainty growing inside her. The space Julian had left was being filled again. Not in the same shape, not the same voice or touch, but filled nonetheless. She tried to ignore the thought. Dogs were dogs, companions, not vessels, not bridges between worlds. But as the days passed, the line blurred a little more each night. Luca's gaze lingered longer. His body pressed closer. And Elena began to wonder, just for a heartbeat, what might happen if she stopped pushing the question away. The days began to arrange themselves around Luca the way they once had around Julian. Morning started with the soft click of claws on the floor as he followed her to the kitchen. She'd brew coffee, set out his bowl, and they'd share the quiet while the light slowly filled the windows. The silence that used to feel like drowning now had shape, texture, warmth. Luca didn't replace the past, he simply made space for the present to breathe again. Elena noticed small rituals forming without effort. The way he waited by the door when she slipped on her coat for their walk. How he'd circle the living room 3 times before settling exactly beside her chair. Little things. Ordinary things. Yet each one stitched her back together, thread by careful thread. She still thought of Julian every day. Some thoughts were sharp, cutting through the hours like broken glass. Others were softer memories of his laugh, the way he used to rest his hand on the small of her back when they walked together, the faint citrus scent of his skin after a shower. The pain hadn't vanished. It had simply learned to coexist with the new rhythm of her life. And Luca seemed to understand that balance instinctively. When the memories grew too heavy, he'd nudge her hand until her fingers found his fur. When she laughed at some small, private joke, he'd tilt his head and thump his tail once, as if agreeing. She began to wonder if animals could carry echoes of the people we've lost. Not in any mystical way, she told herself. Just resonance. The way certain souls recognize each other across forms. One afternoon she found an old photo, tucked inside a book Julian had loved. Him smiling at the camera, eyes crinkled at the corners, hair messy from the wind. She traced the line of his jaw with her thumb, then looked down to see Luca watching her. Not staring. Just present, steady. She showed him the picture. This was him, she whispered. He would have loved you. Luca's tail swept once across the floor. Then he rested his chin on her knee and sighed a long, contented sound. Elena felt something loosen inside her chest. Not grief leaving. Grief staying but making room. Nights were where the shift became most noticeable. Luca had always slept close, but lately he pressed nearer. Not crowding. Never demanding. Just nearer. His body aligned with hers in the dark, spine to spine, or sometimes curled into the hollow behind her knees. The warmth of him seeped into her skin, steady and sure. She found herself sleeping more deeply, waking less often to the hollow ache of an empty bed. And when she did wake, disoriented by some half-remembered dream of Julian, Luca was already there, eyes open, watching her in the faint glow from the hallway light. He never whined or moved. He simply waited until her breathing steadied, then let his head settle back against her side. She told herself it was nothing unusual. Dogs were pack animals. They sought closeness, comfort, protection, yet there were moments when the logic didn't quite fit. The way Luca's gaze sometimes lingered too long. Not in hunger or playfulness, but in something quieter, deeper. Almost knowing. One night she woke to find him sitting upright at the foot of the bed, ears pricked, staring toward the bedroom door. The house was silent. No sound from the street. No creak of settling wood. Just Luca, perfectly still, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. After a long moment, he turned his head toward her, eyes catching the moonlight, and slowly lay back down. Elena's heart beat a little too fast. She reached out, fingers sinking into his fur. He leaned into her touch, solid and warm. She told herself it was nothing. Just a dog being a dog, but the feeling grew, subtle, persistent, like the faint scent of rain before a storm arrives. Luca began following her from room to room with new intensity. Not anxiously. Not frantically. Just attentively. When she stood at the kitchen counter making tea, he sat in the doorway, gaze fixed. When she showered, he waited on the bath mat, head tilted. When she read late into the night, he rested his head in her lap, eyes never quite closing. It wasn't possessive. It was protective. And the more she noticed it, the more she felt watched over. cared for. Seen in a way that made her skin prickle with something between gratitude and unease, she tried to laugh it off. "You're getting clingy, mister," she said one evening, scratching under his chin. Luca's tail moved in slow arcs, but his eyes stayed locked on hers, deep, unblinking, almost tender. For a second she felt the air in the room change, thicken, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Elena swallowed, set her book aside, leaned down until her forehead rested lightly against his. "What are you?" she whispered. Luca didn't move, didn't blink. He simply exhaled, warm breath brushing her cheek, and the moment stretched soft, intimate, strangely familiar. Then very slowly he pressed his nose to the corner of her mouth. Not a lick, not a kiss, just contact, steady, deliberate. Elena froze. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. And in the quiet that followed, she felt the old ache in her chest stir, not in pain, but in recognition. The routine became her lifeline. Wake with Luca's gentle nudge against her side. Brew tea while he sat patiently by the door. Their walks through the neighborhood stretched longer now, not hurried escapes from the house, but shared explorations. The air smelled different with him there, fresher, less lonely. Elena found herself noticing details she'd overlooked for years. The way sunlight filtered through leaves, the distant hum of traffic like a heartbeat. Luca moved beside her with easy grace, pausing when she paused, glancing up as if to check her thoughts. She didn't question it anymore. The bond had deepened quietly, like roots spreading beneath soil, unseen. Unbreakable memories of Julian wove through these moments. Not always painfully now. Sometimes they arrived like old friends, warm, familiar. She'd see a couple holding hands on a bench and remember Julian's fingers laced through hers. The ache would stir, soft and fleeting. Then Luca would lean against her leg, grounding her, reminding her. She began to speak of Julian more openly. "He used to love these paths," she'd say during their walks, voice low. Luca's ears would twitch, his pace steady, as if listening, understanding. One evening they returned home as the sky bruised purple with dusk. Elena sank onto the couch, exhausted from nothing in particular. Luca jumped up beside her without invitation, something new. He rested his head in her lap, eyes closing slowly. She stroked his fur, fingers tracing the soft ridges of his skull. The warmth of him spread through her, easing the day's quiet tensions. But even in the comfort, questions lingered. Whispers in the back of her mind. Why did Luca's gaze sometimes feel so human? Why did his presence echo Julian's in ways that defied explanation? She pushed the thoughts down, buried them under gratitude. Yet they resurfaced in dreams. Dreams where Julian returned not as himself, but as shadow. As warmth, as watchful eyes in the dark. She woke one night to find Luca sitting at her bedside, silhouette outlined by moonlight. Not sleeping. Just there. His breath even. His stare unwavering. Elena reached out. He leaned into her palm, and for a moment the boundary between past and present blurred. Skin to fur. Memory to reality. She whispered Julian's name. Luca exhaled softly, pressing closer. The changes escalated without warning. Subtle at first. Luca's affection grew insistent. Not in play or neediness, but in quiet purpose. He'd position himself between her and the door when the wind rattled the windows. He'd wake before she did, already alert, as if anticipating her needs. One afternoon she spilled coffee on the counter, hot, startling. Before she could react, Luca was there, nudging her away from the mess, his body a barrier, protective, almost possessive. She laughed it off. My knight in shaggy armor. But the laugh felt hollow. That evening, as she prepared dinner, he sat in the kitchen doorway, watching, not moving. His eyes followed every slice of the knife, every stir of the pot. The intensity prickled her skin. Not fear, not yet. Just awareness. A subtle sensuality in the way he occupied space close, attentive, alive with unspoken intent. Nights deepened the unease. Luca no longer curled at her feet. He claimed the space beside her, body aligned, heat radiating like a promise. She'd lie awake, hand resting on his side, feeling the rise and fall of his ribs. The rhythm matched her own, sensed. One night she turned toward him in the dark. "What do you see when you look at me?" She murmured. Luca's eyes opened, gleaming faintly. He shifted, nose brushing her collarbone. Warm, deliberate. Elena's breath caught. The contact lingered. Not animal instinct. Something more. Her fingers tightened in his fur. The house felt smaller. The air thicker. Charged with questions she wasn't ready to ask. She tried to rationalize it the next day. Over coffee. Over walks. Dogs bonded deeply. That was all. But the doubt grew roots. When she left for errands, Luca waited by the window silhouette unmoving until she returned. When she read, his head in her lap, she felt his gaze like a touch, soft, searching. One evening she found an old sweater of Julian's in the closet. The scent faint but there. She held it to her face, breathed. Luca approached slowly, pressing his nose to the fabric. Then to her hand. His eyes met hers deep, knowing. Elena's heart stuttered. Do you remember? The words escaped before she could stop them. Luca didn't react. Not visibly. But he leaned in, body warm against her legs. The moment stretched intimate, electric. She felt seen. Truly seen. In a way that made her pulse quicken. Then, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room, Luca turned his head toward the hallway. Ears pricked. Body tense. As if hearing something she couldn't. Elena followed his gaze. The house was empty, silent, but the air hummed with anticipation. What was coming? What had already arrived? Part 4, word count 900, the tension built like a slow tide. Elena couldn't ignore it anymore. Luca's behavior had shifted from comforting to something deeper, more layered. He no longer just followed her, he anticipated. When she reached for a book on the high shelf, he was there, studying her with a gentle lean against her leg. When she sighed over a memory, his head tilted in quiet acknowledgement. The house felt alive again, not with echoes of the past, but with this new presence that wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. Yet beneath the warmth lay a current of something unspoken. Something that made her skin tingle with awareness. She caught herself watching him now, the way his eyes tracked her movements, soft, attentive, almost yearning. One evening the sky darkened early with storm clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Elena lit candles in the living room. Luca paced once, then settled beside her on the floor, body pressed close. She ran her hand along his back, feeling the subtle rise of muscle beneath fur. The touch lingered, warm, intimate. You're more than I expected, she whispered. Luca's eyes met hers, deep pools reflecting the flickering light. For a moment she saw Julian there. Not literally. Not in features or form. But in essence. The quiet devotion. The unspoken understanding that had defined their love. Her breath caught. The air between them thickened, charged with emotion she hadn't felt in years. She tried to pull back. To remind herself of boundaries. He was a companion. A healer. Not a replacement. But nights blurred those lines further. Luca claimed his space beside her with quiet certainty, body curving to fit hers. The heat of him seeped through the sheets, a sensual reminder of shared vulnerability. One night she woke to rain lashing the windows. Luca was awake too, nose inches from her face. His breath warmed her cheeks, steady, rhythmic. Elena reached out, fingers brushing his jaw. He leaned in, pressing closer. The contact sent a shiver through her. Not fear, recognition. Julian? The name escaped her lips, soft and trembling. Luca stilled. Then exhaled, warm against her skin. The next days brought clarity and confusion in equal measure. Luca's protectiveness intensified. He positioned himself at thresholds, doorways, windows as if guarding against unseen threats. When a neighbor knocked unexpectedly, he stood firm, a low rumble in his throat until Elena touched his head. Calming him. Calming herself. She felt cherished. Seen in a way that stirred old longings. The subtle sensuality of his presence grew undeniable. The brush of fur against her leg. The weight of his head in her lap. The way his gaze held hers with quiet intensity. It wasn't overt. Never demanding. Just there. Filling the spaces Julian had left with something new. Something alive. Yet doubt crept in during quiet moments. Was this healing? Or delusion? She researched online stories of pets sensing grief, mirroring lost loved ones. Rational explanations. but none captured the depth of what she felt. One afternoon she sat on the couch, Luca's head resting against her thigh. She stroked him absently, mind wandering. "If you're him, show me." The words hung in the air, foolish, hopeful. Luca lifted his head, eyes locking on hers. Then he rose, padding to the bedroom. Elena followed, heart pounding. He stopped at the closet, nosing the door open. Inside, on the floor, lay Julian's old watch tucked away. Months ago, forgotten. Luca looked back at her, waiting. The revelation hit like a wave. Not proof. Not logic. But feeling. Deep, resonant. Tears came then hot, cleansing. She knelt, burying her face in Luca's fur. He stood steady, warm body enveloping her in silent comfort. The connection hummed between them, emotional, profound. In that moment, Elena let go. Of doubt, of separation. Love, she realized, didn't end. It transformed. Luca pressed closer, nose to her neck. The touch lingered tender, almost human in its gentleness. Her pulse quickened. The house sat around them as if finally at peace, but peace carried its own shadows. That night, Luca curled against her with new urgency. His body aligned perfectly, heat radiating like a vow. Elena lay awake, hand on his side, feeling the sync of their breaths. 1, 2, 1, 2. Then, in the deepest hour, he shifted. Not away, closer. His nose brushed her ear warm, deliberate. A whisper of air. Almost words. Her eyes flew open. The room was dark, silent, but the feeling remained. Something unresolved. Something waiting to be named. What if this bond wasn't just comfort? What if it demanded more? Thank you for joining this emotional journey. If it stirred something within you, remember, healing comes in unexpected forms. Reach out if you need support. Follow for more heartfelt tales that explore the depths of connection.